Well, thank you very much. And first of all, I must just say thank you for inviting me to speak today. And it really is wonderful to see a whole session dedicated to well-being and mental health within jockeys. It's long overdue, I think, in the sporting world to give this topic the attention that it deserves. And as you'll see from my title, when I say caring for the person behind the athlete, kind of like the title of the session, it's twofold. Number one, jockeys are elite athletes. And second of all, we're going to look in my talk at across all different sports, what are some of the challenges that athletes face? And then what are some of the unique challenges, maybe particularly to jockeys? And then what are some of the best practice in terms of mental health? But I want you to keep this in mind. We heard a lot, both of you spoke about mental toughness, and having to be really tough. And so do you think that there's a difference between mental toughness and mental health? And can you really be mentally tough and maybe still suffer from some mental health issues? And I would say yes, but it's often something that we really, as athletes, we think, oh no, I'm so tough, this can't possibly be happening to me. But just a few quotes. This is from Kevin Love. He's an NBA player, and he was the first player to actually come out and speak about, this is him explaining having a panic attack during an NBA game. He said, everything was spinning, like my brain was trying to climb out of my head. The air felt thick and heavy. My mouth was like chalk. I remember the assistant coach yelling something about a defensive set, and I nodded, but I didn't hear much of what he said. But at that point, I was freaking out. It was like my body was trying to say to me, you're about to die. So this was in the middle of an NBA game. He starts to have this panic attack. And you'll see the quote at the top. He said, for 29 years, I thought that mental health was someone else's problem. And I think this is the issue, is that very often athletes think, no, it happens to someone else, not to me. And partly it's got to do with just being, a lot of times we're not really educated about these things. This was a study that was done in the States. I couldn't find any research in South Africa, but this was, and I think it's probably very similar. Like if I had to say to all of you here, how informed are you around mental health issues? Where would you fall in this? And around only, 18% of people said that they felt that they were very informed. And I do lots of different talks at schools and other places, and you ask different questions like, what is depression, or what is anxiety, what is a panic attack? And so often people don't know. And we're seeing there, probably 80% of people maybe only have a small knowledge of what mental health actually is and what mental health issues really are. And so I think we really need to change that. You have to think, why is this so? There's definitely still a stigma attached to it, and I'm sure during the panel discussion we'll talk a little bit about this. I think athletes in particular, what do you have to be sad about? You're champion jockey, you're Olympic athlete. Like really, what do you have to be sad about? Then this idea of its weakness, pull yourself together, toughen up, especially in South Africa. We like to be tough. So it's weakness to kind of admit anything. And then you have to kind of go and speak to a sports psychologist or a psychologist. It's difficult for athletes. And then this one I love, because I often hear them, I'm not crazy, Kirsten. Like, I don't need to see you. You're not crazy, but you still maybe need to see me. But these are some of them. There's plenty more, and I'm sure you've all heard lots, and I'm sure both of you could also tell us more. But there's still the stigma attached to mental health. And it often, we're going to speak a little bit later on this culture of silence, because there's a stigma. There's definitely the silence. But as we know, we heard this said about 50% of jockeys, but then the average in terms of population, about 1 in 4 people suffer from some diagnosable mental health issue. So if you look around this room and you look around you, sort of 2 people next to you and 1 person next to you, one of you will be suffering from some kind of mental health problem. And it's probably greater than that, but say this is diagnosable. The problem with this, how many of those 25% do you think actually get the help that they need and support that they need? Probably only 2 in 5, so maybe only a third. So you've got a lot of people suffering from mental health issues, but not really getting the help and support that they need. And as we heard very often, you just kind of left, especially as jockeys, on your own to kind of manage it. And in sport, it's very similar. Athletes are people first. So these stats are very similar within the athlete world. But because of that stigma attached to it, and again, this idea of weakness, it often is difficult for athletes to seek help and go and find the help that they really need and the support that they need. But there are a few athletes that are speaking out. So I wanted to show you just across various different sports, that this is something, it's not unique to one particular sport or one particular type of person. So if you know who this is, Oscar de la Hoya, multiple world champion boxer. He said, I could put all my opponents in one ring and battle all of them, but this monster is going to be the toughest fight of my life. And again, he was quite open about his battle with depression and anxiety. This is a tough guy. This is a boxer, world champion boxer. Dame Kelly Holmes, she was double Olympic gold medalist in 2004, in Athens. And she speaks about the fact that I've always been a really positive person. I never really thought I could get as low as I did. She would suffer, she said, sometimes the pressure of performance would get to her, and she would self-harm, so she would cut herself in places that you probably couldn't see. A lot of females do this as well, particularly women. And she said it was a way to kind of just deal with the emotions that she didn't know how to deal with. This is a double gold medalist. And also the problem is because she probably was pretty positive most of the time. So when she wasn't, it was really difficult for her to even think, well, what is going on with me? And then rugby, Sir John Cohen, All Black rugby player, said, I don't wish it on anyone. It was my worst nightmare, but through it I'm a better, stronger, more compassionate person. So hopefully what you can see is that no one is exempt. Whether you are Olympic gold medalist or an ordinary person, these things happen. And sometimes they do pay the ultimate price. And these are just various people. I could put up a whole lot more of, unfortunately, athletes that have committed suicide. And I think from South Africa, the one that kind of struck us the most, Dan Vickerman, he was actually born here in Cape Town. He went across and then went to live in Australia. He played for the Wallabies. And about, I think it was 2 years ago, he committed suicide. He had retired from the game, and it was interesting. He was part of their Players Association. He was essentially, they said, like this poster boy for a great transition, a great retirement. He had a young family and ended up committing suicide. And people were like, well, sure, what was going on? And then eventually a few of his teammates sort of started speaking out and saying, well, while he was still playing, he suffered quite a lot from depression. But again, they used this word, this culture of silence within rugby, where people didn't actually speak out. And again, whether it's Robert Enker, there is Jared Bannister from Australia, Kelly Caitlin, cyclists, there's plenty. And as you'll see, I didn't necessarily do it on purpose, but as I was viewing the slide, I thought, you'll see more men than women there. And unfortunately, we know that more women attempt suicide, but more men actually kill themselves. And in a male-dominated sport like racing is, we really have to take that stat seriously. And we were talking earlier, Victoria, again, about just sometimes the rates of suicide within the racing world, which is quite frightening. And as I say, jockeys are not exempt. And as we've been hearing, actually, sometimes the lifestyle of the jockey can actually make it more prone to some of these mental health issues. And as you would have heard in the video earlier, one of my real areas of interest is retirement and the difficulties with transitioning out. So you can have these mental health difficulties while you are performing. Often it's got to do with performance anxiety, the pressures of performance. Also, there's all sorts of things, genetics, those kind of things. But we know that very often rates of depression and anxiety go up once athletes retire. So we heard Sir A.P. McCoy said, I woke up with a goal every day. I woke up with a challenge every day. I woke up half nervous. You wake up and get on the weighing scales and you have a routine. Trying to replace that, you go into property or finance or whatever it may be, you're not going to get something that makes you have that nervousness in the morning. It's difficult not being under pressure. I'm just floating. So you said that adrenaline rush. Like, where do you get that adrenaline rush from anywhere else? And this idea of, I was going to property, I was going to this, but it's not really what you want. And so many athletes speak about this idea of just floating around, like, what am I going to do? I wanted to do this, and now I have to try to find something else. And then there's issues with identity. A lot of athletes battle with loss of identity. Who am I if I'm no longer an athlete, no longer a swimmer or runner or a jockey? And this was a jockey, but he preferred to remain anonymous. But I spoke with him, and he said, we talk about athletes waking up from the harsh realities of life after sport. But for me, I didn't sleep, and so it felt like one long, continuous living nightmare. What do I tell people when they ask what I do? Can I still tell them that I'm a jockey? Who am I now? Where do I fit into society? Do I even fit in at all? I wanted to cry and scream in frustration. The anger was overwhelming, but no amount of anger could change the fact that this was now my life. Or rather my existence. Again, had a career-ending injury. It's not Anthony, so in case you're wondering, but someone else. And it was just like, who am I? And I say a lot of athletes battle with that too. And so you're saying, how do we help prepare for this and prepare them? And that's the one guarantee in sport. We can't guarantee that you're going to make it. We can't guarantee that you're going to earn lots of money, but we can absolutely guarantee that you're going to retire from sport one day. And if we know that in good conscience, why are we not preparing athletes for that? Otherwise, we're just treating them like commodities. And then when they retire, you kind of like, cheers, enjoy the rest of your life. And as a sports psychologist, I thought I can't get athletes to perform and then really just, again, say, well, good luck. And then say, I didn't want to treat athletes like commodities like that. So what is some best practice? And as you'll see again, so AP McCoy, and speaking just about being really tough, not showing any weakness. It's a real man sport. Great to have a woman that's won something. But it's this idea, again, of weakness, of toughness, that often prevents people from getting help. But as you said, sometimes it's good to speak to people. So what is happening around the world? Well, if we look, there's lots, I could talk a whole hour on these things, but there's some change, there's some shift in the sporting world. In the beginning of the year, the NBA, the National Basketball League in the States, as well as the NFL, have made it a rule that you have to have a full-time sports psychologist working with your team. So a sports psychologist is a member of your staff. They also have to have access to a psychiatrist, kind of a contracted psychiatrist, in case the athletes also need medication. And it's a great step forward in terms of acknowledging that a sports psychologist is a vital part of a team to help athletes. Often players' associations do the work of mental health awareness and kind of looking after the well-being. In cricket, rugby, soccer, the players' associations are very active. In South Africa here, I work with the SACA, the South African Cricketers Association, together with my players, which is the Rugby Players Association. And they each have player development managers. So I'm the PDM, and I will go work with different unions or franchises. It's my responsibility to look after the players. So I meet with them face to face. I do workshops with them. We talk about these different topics, not just mental health, life skills. It's kind of anything apart from sport. But it's driven by the players' associations. And it's also, we're going to speak now, it's compulsory. The players have to do it, because as we know, otherwise they don't. There is also some movement. The International Olympic Committee had a consensus statement last year around mental health. They also wanted to draw up some guidelines, and it was going to be now in January that they were looking at it, but they haven't come out yet, but guidelines around sport. Because in South Africa, there's, other than cricket and rugby, our Olympic sport athletes and our jockeys are pretty much left to themselves. There's no formal structures outside of the academy, as we've spoken about, but the Olympic sports is really nothing, which is a huge problem, actually. NCAA in the States, they have some mental health best practices as well, but there's not very much. So if you kind of take all the research and look, what are we supposed to be doing? How can we really help? There are a couple of things. Number one, education and awareness. It's critical. As we saw on that one slide, like vast majority, 80% of people are probably not very well informed. And athletes themselves, they don't really know, like, why am I even feeling like this? They don't always understand. So we need to drive, and I think it is the administrator's role to drive education and awareness campaigns. Then we have to understand as well that there need to be networks, referral networks. So I know that's something that we're doing in South Africa as well, to look at how can we have registered psychologists that know about sport, because that's also the difference. Sometimes it's difficult when you don't know the sport, because as you say, you live in a completely abnormal world and do abnormal things, but it's completely normal within this elite sport world. So how do you help manage that? So we have to create these referral networks that jockeys can have access to. We have to create the environment, though, as well, that they are able to reach out. And that's linked somewhat to these education campaigns, that it's not seen as something that's a stigma or that you don't want people to know. And maybe, as you're saying, having a sports psychologist in the jockey room or just access is really what you're wanting. But we have to somehow create that environment that they're able to access those networks. Importantly, it needs to also be multidisciplinary. You can't only have one person looking after the jockey. It's a whole bunch of people that can be involved, that can be looking at well-being, because well-being is more than simply just mental health. So how do we use a whole team of people to be able to make sure that these jockeys are looked after? Then one potential thing we could also think about doing, and I would encourage to do, are sort of regular screenings. When I say screenings, I said to my players in Lusaka, it's compulsory for the players to attend certain sessions. I think it needs to be compulsory for some jockeys to have contact with sports psychologists. Let's say you have medical screenings half in the year, but at least, let's say, twice a year, you also have to make contact with a sports psychologist. Because without doing that, I know there's no ways that they're going to come and talk to me or to another psychologist. You kind of have to push them to do it. But it is amazing when it's compulsory and you do it, the response. So I work here with one of our provincial rugby teams, and again, went and did a talk on mental health. And it was amazing afterwards how many of the guys came up to me or wanted to come see me in my private practice. I'm like, oh, Kirsten, I think maybe I was depressed then, or I'm really struggling now. And I always have to laugh, because in my practice, you come in and you have very different sizes of athletes, and these rugby players are huge, just trying to get themselves into my couch. And here they are talking about their feelings. I was like, this is amazing. This is exactly what we want. But it required that compulsory session for them to be able to hear it, and then they could get the help that they needed. And then, of course, we need to understand that everyone is unique. So everyone is different, and we have to understand the jockeys in the unique world that they live in, the unique personalities, and how do we use these different education campaigns and networks and environment that we can meet the unique needs. And I do think that there are people in the room here that have the power to do that, because it does require a collective will, because otherwise these just stay guidelines on a piece of paper. But we have to have a collective will to say we really do need to look after jockeys. As I said, otherwise, I do feel we're treating people like commodities. And if we have that collective will, people can get the help that they need. So thank you very much for listening.